Hello, ScotsCare Podcast listeners. We're thrilled there's more of you than ever before, and we want to keep it that way. But did you know that most of us listen without subscribing or following the podcast? We would love it if, whichever platform you listen to, you follow or like or subscribe to the podcast. It makes a huge difference to us. Now, let's get on with this week's programme. Hello, I'm Marcus Railton, and welcome to Series 3 of the ScotsCare Podcast. ScotsCare is the only charity dedicated to helping disadvantaged Scots across London, breaking the cycle of poverty through services such as financial support, homelessness, mental health therapy, family support, advocacy, sheltered housing, social events and befriending, amongst others. In the new series, I'll be chatting with guests from all backgrounds, all with one thing in common: Scottish roots. Listen to the ScotsCare Podcast to hear their story. My guest today is Ross King, TV and radio presenter, actor, writer, and one of Scotland's best known broadcasters. For years, Ross has been Hollywood's man in the know, reporting for ITV's Lorraine and bringing us interviews with the biggest names in film and music. He's also appeared on stage and screen, written books, and even picked up an MBE for his services to broadcasting, the arts and charity. And most recently, he's been showing off his moves on Strictly Come Dancing. Ross joined me from his home in the Hollywood Hills. You can actually see the sign from his balcony. Very posh. When we spoke, it was about 8 p.m. my time, and I think it was around lunchtime where he was. We had some gremlins at the beginning of the recording, mostly from my side. Well, all from my side. I managed to lock myself out of my laptop and I had to employ all my in-depth IT knowledge to solve the problem. I turned it off and I turned it back on again. Ross was very understanding. He's a lovely man. We chatted about early ambitions. Ross never set out to be a presenter, a journalist or a broadcaster. He actually wanted to be a professional football player, and he nearly made it. We talked about how he ended up in the USA and how that has become his home for the last 25 years. He was telling me about when he has to interview people like Al Pacino or Gerard Butler and how he manages to still the nerves in these situations. We also chatted about the fact that he's a best-selling novelist. He has co-written 3 novels with the well-known writer Shari Lowe. All this and much, much more besides. So here we go on the ScotsCare Podcast with Ross King.
ScotsCare, the charity helping to break the cycle of poverty some Scots find in London.
Hi Ross, thanks for doing this.
My pleasure, Marcus. Thank you for having me on.
Now, when I was doing research, I go to your website and there's a brilliant picture of you and Alan Stewart there. It's this fantastic picture. And he came on the podcast and we did it as a kind of Christmas one, like a Christmas panto podcast. And I had somebody pass me on his number and I phoned him up and I was really nervous because I'd kind of grown up watching Alan at the King's Theatre. You know, he Panto Dame, he'd gone kind of right through, very famous. And I said, "Oh, Mr. Stewart, would you come on the podcast?" And he went, "Oh, aye, no problem. I love talking about myself."
He does. And he also likes to be called Mr. Stewart, even though I've known him my whole life, yes.
But when I was looking at that photo, I was thinking, you seem quite similar people from a very grounded point of view. You're both very grounded people. And I wondered, is that just both of your personality or is that to do with being Scottish? Or?
Oh, it's a great question. I think it's probably a mixture of everything. I mean, Alan was a huge influence on my career and still is. I mean, we talk every other day. I always refer to him as the big brother that I never wanted.
I never wanted.
and that sums up our relationship. No, he's a great person. And the weirdest thing was that when I was a kid living in Glasgow, and I was going to be a footballer before I realised that I was rubbish. But the week that I was going to go and have a couple of trials at some of the big teams, my mate Keith from school, Keith Mitchell, he said to me, my grand's got tickets for the A to Z of Alan Stewart, which was a variety show that he was doing on TV at Scottish Television. And I went with Keith. And as we went into and Keith was a great footballer, and we went into the studio, and as we sat down, the lights went up in the studio, and it was a shiny white floor, and the whole place went boom. And I went, this is what I want to do. I want to be in this business, stuff all that, cold, wet, days on football fields and getting all muddy. I went, no, I want the shiny, bright lights of show business. So, and that was it. And then it was really funny that when I went into hospital radio, which is where I really started in terms of the radio and TV business, I remember saying to one of the bosses there, I said, do people in show business, are they friendly with each other? And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, do you think I'd ever be friends with Alan Stewart one day? And sadly, it came true.
I hope he never hears this. But do you know what?
Oh, absolutely. People say, who would you like to have at a dinner party? Anyone, dead or alive? And I go, Alan Stewart, dead.
He is lovely, isn't he? But you spoke about hospital radio there, and I grew up listening to you on Radio Clyde. I was born in Clydebank. Grew up in
Clydebank. Yeah, I was going to say that you're from Clydebonky.
Yeah, a fellow Banky. And the thing is, though, you must have been awfully young when you were on Radio Clyde.
Yeah. Thankfully, now when you look back, thankfully I was very young. Yeah, I joined Radio Clyde at that time when I went into hospital radio. So I was 15, 16. I was the Saturday boy. And Paul Cooney, another broadcasting legend from Scotland. When I say another, I don't mean me. I'm talking about Paul Allen. Paul Cooney was the head of sport. And he gave me the job as the Saturday boy. And it literally meant you did everything. You made the teas, the coffees, you photocopied the scripts, you ran in, you recorded stuff, you went to the football grounds, you threw the cables over, because back in the day then, that was how you did it. You had a radio van and you threw cables over the stanchions and all the rest of it. And it was just the most fantastic grounding. And Paul was, and again, still, one of my best friends, was just an amazing mentor to me. And so I was I think I was 15 because I was still at school. So I would have been 15 or 16. And that was me working there as the Saturday boy. And that was it.
That's interesting, isn't it? Now, you grew up in Knightswood, and I have very fond memories of Knightswood because I used to get, when in Clydebank, and we used to get the bus along because there was a big, I don't know if you remember this, there was a pitch and putt golf course in Knightswood. And we used to go to that all the time. But how would you describe it? It's a kind of, would you say it's a suburb in the west of Glasgow?
Yeah. Whenever I think of
is that posh?
It does make it sound much posher. No, it's funny when Billy Connolly, I was very lucky that I got to know Billy a little bit. And he went, Knightswood, it's incredible. It was like America, big wide roads. And it's funny, whenever I go back and I drive round there, you're going up places like Alderman Road and Dyke Road, and you think, my goodness me, they actually were really wide, which was strange, you think, for Glasgow, and normally like sort of roads everywhere. But yeah, you go along Alderman Road and it's big. So it was funny. Billy was like America. I used to go to Knightswood and it was like America. It was incredible.
I understand what you mean about, because my dad was a driving instructor. And so he used to teach people all around Knightswood because of the big wide roads.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, that's funny because I had a driving instructor. I was one of those kids who just all I wanted to do was drive the car. That was it. I just wanted to drive. And my dad, who was the most law-abiding citizen you could ever meet, used to allow me. We'd go up to the industrial estate just behind sort of Scotstoun, the back roads as they were called, the back roads of Scotstoun, and we'd go there late at night and he would let me drive the car before I was 16 or 17, whatever the legal time was. And so I because I'd watched my dad so much, and it was stick shifts, it was a manual, and I would drive the car. And so I actually could drive reasonably well before even it was my test. And then I got a driving instructor for my test. And I remember getting in the car, and it was my first driving lesson with him. And he said, "When's your test?" And I said, 2 weeks. And he went, "Right, you just want me to..." I wonder if it was your dad. Wouldn't that be so funny if your dad taught me to drive for my test?
That would be brilliant. I love that.
His name wasn't Jim, was it?
No, it was Ernie.
Oh,
Ernie.
He drove the fastest milk cart as well, I remember.
Yeah. I remember my dad casually remarking one day when we were listening to something, it's kind of strange Billy Connolly connection as well, that he had taught Jerry Rafferty to drive.
Oh my goodness!
And that was,
he drove him down Baker Street.
Yeah, my dad was such a modest man.
Got an idea for a song.
Yeah, maybe I've got some money coming. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Can we chat briefly about football, because you mentioned it, and I read about that, and I was so glad that you had a trial, because Partick Thistle was my team when I was growing up. I grew up, my first place that my parents lived was on Maryhill Road, so we were just about a mile and a half from the stadium.
Yeah.
And that would have been so. But you've kind of already alluded to saying what the lights came on when you saw Alan. But I was wondering if the trial had gone well for you and you had to make a choice between football and showbiz, which way you'd have went.
Well, I mean, it was interesting. I mean, I loved Thistle were my team, and I went there as a schoolboy. And it was so funny that, so I mean, I was doing fairly well at football, I would say, and I got taken in, and it was Jackie Husband, who's Thistle fans will know was a legend. There's a Jackie Husband stand and all the rest of it. Yeah. And Jackie was the assistant manager at the time, and Bertie Auld, one of the Lisbon Lions, was the manager. So Jackie says, "Right, come on, son, take you in to meet the boss." So we went to this little office in Firhill, and he knocks on the door, and he opens the door, and all I remember, just clouds of smoke, because Bertie would smoke cigars.
I was just thinking that, yeah.
I couldn't, I always couldn't see him. And he had the ITV7 on the TV, and it was like Bertie's in there somewhere. And Jackie said, boss, the new boy here. Come and see the new boy. And he went, "How you doing, son?" And he says, "I hope you do well." And he looked at me and he went, "He says, you'll wear out more mirrors than football boots."
Oh, that's great. That's a great line, isn't it? Yeah.
I know, it was just perfect for Bertie. And I mean, I realized at that time, again, when you I mean, I think I would have been, probably I'm bumming myself up a bit by saying I could have been professional, but I'd have been a very, very, very average, footballer. But it was great being around Thistle at that time, because I remember you go into the dressing room and there were people like Alan Hansen was there,
right,
and
Alan
Jackie
Ruff in
Campbell.
goals.
Scruffy was in goals. John Hansen, Alan Hansen, Dennis McQuaid. I mean, just wonderful names that will mean nothing to a heck of a lot of people, but to us, you go, "Oh my goodness me," because that's the team that we grew up with. So to actually be there, actually, I was remember Benny Rooney, who was a great midfielder, who then went on to manage some teams, and I think he'd come from Morton. And I remember going in just before the game, and Benny was sitting there just asleep. It was just the funniest thing. And then the weirdest thing was that because of my association with the Jags, just a few years ago, they had this thing where they wanted me to actually sign professionally. I mean, obviously, way past my time. Anyway, the long and short, it was a bit of a publicity thing. So I actually eventually signed for Thistle, and I got my full strip. I had my squad number and all the rest of it. And every week in the program, I would be down as a substitute.
Oh, really?
I was still playing a lot of football out here at the time. Barry Venison, legendary Liverpool, Newcastle fullback. And I said to Barry, "Can you just look at my contract?" I mean, obviously there's no money involved. I said, "But I've got to sign a contract. It's with the Scottish Football Association." So he looked at it and he went, "Oh man," he said, "you're signing away everything here. You're signing away your imaging rights." No, I said, "Listen, Barry, it's my old team and all the rest of it." And then he looked at it and he went, "Oh," he said, "you could have a bit of a problem though." And I went, "What's that?" He said, if there's an epidemic, you'll have to play." And I was like, I know this is before COVID.
Yeah.
Barry, if there's because he said, "You're listed. So if they don't have enough players, you're going to have to play." He said, they'd have to I was like, oh, don't be ridiculous. I then went back, the end of that season, it was really funny. It was the last game of the season, and we were playing Hamilton Accies. So it was nothing at stake. And there's a little bit of you thinks, I could just go on for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And then you're thinking about it, and then you start thinking, yeah, and then somebody just wants to have a little, smack at you or something. And then the young fullback that day, James, they said, this is James, and I was like, oh, hi. And he said he's making his debut as well. I was like, oh, great. And he said, what year do you think he was born? And he was born in something like 2002.
Oh, don't.
It was like, my underpants are older than that.
ScotsCare, the charity helping to break the cycle of poverty some Scots find in London.
Let me talk to you about moving to the US, because how did that come about for you? I was thinking, just from a Scottish point of view, the weather, never mind anything else, or had you kind of, had your career migrated you from Glasgow down south and then to the US? So I know nothing about how and why you moved there. So how did that come about?
Why? The weather. Basically what happened was, weirdly enough, I've always felt that I would live in America. I don't know why. I think it maybe as a kid in Scotland and then Knightswood and watching Starsky and Hutch and all the rest of it and thinking, oh, that place looks really cool. I think there was a bit of that. Then I moved to London. Thankfully, I was doing a lot of TV and musicals and theatre. And again, I'd always loved it out here. And then back in the 90s, I was working on a show with the BBC called Pebble Mill. It was a lunchtime entertainment show. And they sent me out here to cover the Oscars. And the minute I arrived in LA, I thought, yes, I'm going to live here. There was just something about it. I don't know what it was. I just had that feeling that this would be home at some point. And amazingly enough, I actually got offered work then. And I thought, no, I'm not ready for it just yet. It was funny. I felt the same way when I was a kid at Radio Clyde. And then Richard Park, who I'd worked with a lot, I'd been like his roadie. And then, he gave me my first radio show on Clyde. Wanted me to join Capital Radio, and Radio 1 had wanted me to join them. And at the time, I just didn't feel right. I thought, no, I still need to serve a bit more of an apprenticeship and enjoy what I'm doing. And it was a little bit the same TV-wise when I came here at first. And I got a couple of offers, and I thought, oh, this could be great. But I thought, no, just go back again, learn more of your craft, and enjoy the time that I was having in the UK. So that's what I did. But there was always that little bit at the back of my head that thought, this is what I want to do. Then jump ahead to 1999, and I had been playing Frankenfurter in the Rocky Horror Show.
All right, yeah.
And then my agent was saying, do you want to do more musicals? And I had a couple of offers. And then I did a musical at Sadler's Wells in the West End in London as well. And I was backstage one night, and I looked up, and I remember the moment vividly, even as I'm talking to you now, Marcus. I'm looking up and thinking, I don't know. I'm just a little bit, don't know. That way, like running on empty was the feeling that I had. And I thought, I need to do something different. I want to do something different. And I thought, you know what? I have often talked about America. Maybe now is the time. Maybe it's calling me. And that was it. And then just after the millennium, I thought, I'm off. And I came out here. Didn't have any work to go to. I had a few phone numbers. Thankfully, a couple of them, one was Catherine Zeta-Jones. So it was a good phone number to have. Yeah. And I came out here, and I knocked on agents' doors. People there was an agent that had seen me in one of the musicals in London and places like that. And that was it. And then the crazy thing is, as I'm speaking to you now, that 2000, and here we are, 25 years later. I'm still here, still working, still haven't been found out.
Though, because I think going back to what we're talking about at the beginning there, where I said you come across as a very grounded person, and then I think it takes a lot of pragmatism to say this is not quite the right time, and to stay and do a wee bit more and get a bit more, smooth the edges even a bit more. And then it's interesting that and I know what you mean by saying, I'm now ready for another adventure in my life. This is this is the right time. But that takes discipline, I think, and I think you should discipline doing it that way.
I think also I was very lucky along the way to have great people guide me. When I was at Radio Clyde, Jack McLaughlin, who people in Scotland will remember, the Hooter Chooter Man, and
oh yes, yeah,
a TV show Thingamajig and all the rest of it. And Jack was an amazing broadcaster, and had really been a broadcaster in the true terms of the name. And he gave me such great advice when I was young in terms of being a broadcaster. And then also, even when I did my first pantomime at the Pavilion Theatre in Glasgow, I was kind of given the opportunities to have like a bigger role, but I wanted to be what was always termed then the broker's men, because you had people like Andy Cameron in it and Johnny Beattie, and Andy Cameron was just the most brilliant guy to watch on stage every night, and he was so giving as well. I used to love it. I'd get in early, and Andy would be around, and he'd be like, "Okay, son, fancy a wee bowl of soup?" And we'd go round to a little restaurant round the corner from the Pavilion Theatre. And I would just sit and I would just ask him, question after question after question. And he was so giving. And I was very fortunate, again, when I then even moved to London, I would write to people like Bob Monkhouse and Des O'Connor. And then, they would say, call me. Because I said, look, I just want advice. I just want to sit down with you. I just want to ask you questions. And it was interesting. People like with Des and with Bob, they were so giving, and also were very, they said themselves, they said, a lot of people don't do this now, but that's what we did. They would go to the theatres, or to speak to the people who'd done it, who'd been there, and got their advice. And it was really interesting that not as many people did that as I just imagined. Everybody did that. Everyone sent off a letter, "Dear Mr. Monkhouse," or "Dear Mr. O'Connor, I'd love to chat with you," and all the rest of it. And both of them, and Des, I would see a lot, not as much as I would see Bob. And when Bob would come out here, we'd go and have dinner, and he was so giving to me, and said, you should do some stand up out here. And he said, I'll write stuff for you. And,
wow.
I still have the package. I have the package that he sent me. And he was a great artist. And on the cover, it was all the pictures that he'd drawn, and sent me this material and just said, try this and try that, or, mold this to the way that you want to do things. And to have people like that in your life to guide you. And I think also you just realize that they were brilliant. I'm never going to be like them, but I'm going to strive to be as much as I can. And it was a bit like with football. I was so lucky that even, I got Danny McGrain, the Celtic and Scotland fullback, picked me to play for Scotland against England at Wembley. It was a game before the boys' club final. And, I was in a team that was just full of all these, Archie Gemmill, Eddie Gray, Frank Gray, John Brownlee, it was just Peter McCloy in goals. It was just phenomenal. And, that thing where, you're there, and even on that day, you realize, of course, these people are just leagues above you. But just being with them, talking with them, and then actually getting to play with them, it made you better. Obviously, it was never going to make you as good as them, but it just made you better. And that's what I've always enjoyed in this business. And I always think, even when it comes to acting now, you always want to play tennis with somebody who's better than you, because the ball comes pinging back, and then you learn so much more. And that's what I've always done. And I've been, again, so lucky, Marcus, with the people that have been generous to me with their time.
Well, you sound very humble when you say these things. And I think it does make a lot of sense now that you've explained it to me, because one of the things I did want to talk to you about and ask you about is, I watch you on the telly, and you might be interviewing Al Pacino or Gerard Butler, and you never seem overwhelmed or intimidated. I watched an interview when I was doing research, and you were talking to Gerard Butler, and he's a personal hero of mine.
Yeah,
and it just looked as if you were having a pint in a pub, and I just wondered, is that just you, or is that years of experience, or is it a bit of both, or how would you explain that, Ross?
Yeah. Again, good question. I think it is just an amalgamation of all of the things. Again, I always feel really blessed that what you see in the TV is kind of who I am. I'm not any different. So I've never had any problems that, how like you meet a lot of comedians and they're manic depressives, or they're this, or you meet big movie stars who are just not the way they were or the way you want them to be, and all the rest of it. So I've always been very lucky that it's just me and that's what I do, and I'm lucky to be able to carry that on into doing something that I love. I've always loved chatting to people and finding out more about them. So I think there's that. But I think also, yeah, again, it's experience that you think when I was at Radio Clyde and I'd be thrown into things, and I remember one time at Love Street, Paisley, home of St. Mirren, and I was the Saturday boy, and I'd been there and I'd been rigging the football ground, and we had this aerial thing that you had to stick up, and the problem was that the gaffer tape wasn't quite sticking. It was a cold, wet day, and it kept falling down. So I had to hold it like this, almost for the whole of the game. So I couldn't even really watch the game, which I enjoyed as well. But I was like this, and at the end of it, our commentator had to go back. I think it was Jerry McNee at the time. Had to go back to the studio, and I was there, and I've obviously still got the mic, and we're live. And then they said, "Oh, we've got Jim Clooney, the manager of St. Mirren, coming up." And I was like, "Great." And then they said, "Oh, we're in the middle of something else. You just have to interview him." And I remember thinking, "What?" And it was funny that kicked in. That obviously, again, it'd just been experience of being there and being around people like Paul Cooney and watching them work. That it's like a process of osmosis. It just went through my body. And then that continued into, again, because people like Jack McLaughlin said, do everything, do the arts program, try and do some stand-up, host stuff, go around whatever you can grasp at, you will learn from it. And eventually when I started to move into TV, it was the same thing, because I remember the first show that I was doing, and nothing there'd been no real rehearsals, etc., etc., etc. And I sat there, and then they said, "Right, okay, we're going in, 20 seconds, everybody, quiet studio, 10 seconds." And I remember thinking, "Oh no, I'm going to have to just stop this." And they were like counting down 10, 9, and I thought, at some point, somebody's going to jump in and go, "We haven't rehearsed any of this. There's no auto cue. There's nothing. It's terrible." And I thought it got to 5, and I thought, I've got to speak up now and go, "No, stop. I'm sorry, I can't do this." And it was 4, 3, 2, 1, cue. And I went from, and I've still got the video of it. And I am sitting there, the back of my shirt is soaked. I'm absolutely wringing with sweat. And it got to 2, 1, go, and I went, "Welcome, blah, 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 blah." And I still watch it, not often, but I watch it and go, I have no idea who that person is that just went, "Here we are." And it was such a great grounding for me in terms of live TV to know that I'll just go.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing. And also when it comes to, as you were saying, like interviewing people, even when you sit across from people like Al Pacino, just one of the greatest actors ever, and you sit across from him, and there's a bit of you goes, "I'm a daft boy from Glasgow sitting across from Al Pacino." And, everyone has that imposter syndrome. But the funniest thing is that with a lot of the people that you interview, they have the exact same imposter syndrome. Yes. That, you'll kind of get found out. So yeah, anyway, so that was the biggest, longest, winded.
No, it made me think of a lot of things. It made me actually think of an interview I read just the other day with an old friend of yours, with Chesney Hawkes, and he was saying a thing that really kind of stuck with me. He says, "Don't believe the hype." And I thought, oh, that's very true. And then I was thinking about stuff that you've said before in interviews where you talked about the importance of your family and your sister Lorraine. And I wonder how you could have balanced that with because you have access to these inner circles of, I don't know, it's not reality, but it's a kind of hyper reality. So how you go from Jerry Butler or Al Pacino or a red carpet event where it's all kind of bonkers, to coming home and putting the kettle on and taking your shoes off 1 foot at a time or whatever it is. So how do you stay real within where you are in Hollywood?
Well,
And stay
I think
mentally healthy, I suppose, is what I'm asking,
yeah,
really.
yeah. I mean, I think that's. I mean, obviously, mental health is a huge thing that's talked about. And again, I was just lucky that I not only did I learn from the best in terms of people in the business, but also I learned so much from my mum and dad. And mum had this really great simple thing. She would always say, "Just do your best, son. That's all you can do." And you know, the first times I remember kind of hearing that were, getting up to sing at weddings or doing something at school or even going off to play football. And it was so weird that I can still, as I'm telling you the story, I can still imagine walking out the door and my mum going, just do your best, son. That's all you can do. And I think I was probably about 21, 22 before I did realize that if you do your best, that's all you can do. And if you can sit back and go, well, I did my best. And if it's not good enough, you can't do any better than that. But if you've done, I think what it was, I learned then all the things that you have to do your best. So in terms of football, it was like, was I training? Was I working out? Was I practicing? Was I, eating healthily, et cetera, et cetera. All the things that add up to you doing your best. But once you realize that, and then, taking it to another way, George Clooney would always say, with an addition, you go in with nothing, and if you come out with nothing, there we are. It's there's nothing. Don't get so worked up about all these things. And so that's the way that I've always been. And mum and dad were just great like that, and just very. I feel so lucky, so blessed to have come from a very, very, what I always thought was just the most ridiculously normal family. And then when I look back on it now, it's in many respects abnormal that, mum and dad were there all the time for me and Elaine. My sister and I have an incredibly close relationship, and her husband, Jim, and Holly and Ewan, my niece and nephew, we're so close like that. And I feel, ridiculously lucky that, when you're surrounded by that and, my girlfriend, Bridget, no one would put up with any nonsense. I think is another thing. And I think, you know it yourself, coming from Clydebank and like through whatever, you would just, get a smack in the back of the head and be like, get over it, whatever it is, don't bring your nonsense in here.
That is a very Scottish thing. But let me ask you this, if you don't mind me asking you this, then it's about, so you put the training in and you're doing, you made your phone calls but life has ups and downs. So there must have been periods when you think, the phone's not ringing, or the work's not coming in, or it's not as good as it could be, or it should be. I mean, how are you good at dealing with those periods? Are you pragmatic enough to go, okay, don't panic, Ross. This is going to be okay. This is just a dry month, or this will turn itself around.
Yeah, I've always realized how lucky I was. I think that's been such a part of my life that, I often say, if I'm talking to schools or whatever, students, the grass always seems greener, as we all know. And then sometimes when you get over there, you realize that sometimes not only is it not greener, there's actually no grass. It just looked that way it was an optical illusion. And so what I've always done is I've always been ambitious, always striving for the next thing, but also really enjoying where I was and what I was doing. And also always thinking, do you know what, if this is it, then there we are. I'm a kid in school, want to be a footballer. I get to play in all these, good games. And then suddenly I start working at Radio Clyde. And, as the Saturday boy, I used to think, well, obviously I want to be a DJ and all the rest of it. But you know what? I get to go to, at the time before we moved to Clydebank, at Anderson Cross in the centre of Glasgow, the fact just going there on a Saturday was just so exciting. And then, you start working on other shows, then you start producing stuff, then you get on air. And then you start doing shows, and my first shows were through the night, 2 in the morning till 6 in the morning. Yeah. All those things. So I really enjoyed it. And then you start doing gigs and all the rest of it. And a story that I often tell, which is that one of the big highlights for me, it was when we were doing Sport Aid. So we had Live Aid and then we had Sport Aid, and it was a big thing. And the Scottish Exhibition and Conference Centre hadn't long opened. And I was hosting the event, and it was, 10,000 people all crammed in. And it was just the most wonderful day. And you're bringing on all these different pop stars and all the rest of it. And you're playing music, getting everyone to jump and all the rest of it. And I remember thinking, all the things that I've done in my life, I thought Mum and Dad must be quite proud of me today. And I looked down at this crowd. Unbelievably, I could see my mum and dad. They pushed their way to the front of these 10,000 people. So I did the next introduction, and I turned and I went down. I said, I've got to go down and see my mum and dad. And there were a couple of minders and things. They were like, no, you can't go down. The crowds. And I said, no, it's my mum and dad. So I got down, and they had all these crash barriers. So they got to within, I don't know, maybe 20 feet, 20, 30 feet. And I was there, and I could see mum and dad. I was like, yeah, like this. And I'm giving it the old showbiz 2 thumbs up. And I'm going to my mum, okay, like this. And my mum looked at me and she went, speak slower.
Oh, brilliant. That takes the wind right out of your sails, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Exactly. And that was perfect. And that was just mum and dad. That was, again, you would never really get ahead of yourself. But equally, the way I looked at it was, I had that day, and I think of all the times that I've been so lucky that, being young, being at Clyde, then being at Capital, then, hosting Bros at Wembley Stadium in front of 75,000 people, doing a live TV show from there. And so every time I've done it, I've always, and I do it with some of the younger members of the teams that I work with. I say, take this mental, you don't need to take an actual selfie. Just close your eyes, take in a mental picture. Because as I'm telling you now, I can see those moments like that. I'm right back there. And it's to enjoy it and be present. That's the thing. It's to be present in whatever you're doing, to be right there, rather than, it's like, me chatting with you. I'm not thinking at all about what I'm doing later today. I'm just going, this is what I'm doing just now. We're, chatting away. So I think that's the other thing. You have to be present. And I think in terms of, especially when you're doing interviews with, say, it's Al Pacino, and I never have, I have questions in my head, but I don't sit there with a clipboard or, a big sheet of paper, because I think it takes you out of that moment. You want to be present and you want to be aware of what someone has said.
Need someone to talk to? ScotsCare's counselling service offers quick, confidential support wherever you are. Free for eligible Scots in the Greater London area.
If I've got you for a wee bit longer, I just want to talk about yet another talent of yours, which is the writing, because now you have written books along with Shari Lowe, and I'm reading about this, and it says you've known each other for best part of 5 years. We're sticking with number 5 so we don't look old.
There might have to be like a 4 in front of that or something.
But so you've known each other for ages, but when did the conversation start? When did you go, do you know what, we could do this? Was it just like you've opened a bottle of whiskey, or how does it work? How we could do this together?
Yeah, no, it's quite a funny one. So yeah, I'd known Shari was the receptionist at the Cue Ball. I don't know if you remember the Cue Ball
flagship in Annisland.
There we are. So it wasn't. So she was there, and there was one in Paisley as well, and she was the receptionist, and I was doing my gigs and what have you, when I was 17 or something like that. And so we got to know each other, and then of course she went off, and at the moment she's just absolutely on fire. She's at 2 million books or something. She is the most prolific writer I know, and also just the loveliest person. And she came to me a few years ago and said, look, I've been speaking with a couple of publishers. How do you feel about me ghost writing your biography?
Wow. Okay.
So I said, well, First thing is, it's a pamphlet. And I could just write it down this weekend, and we'll give it to the family at the weekend or at Christmas.
You can put it in the program at Firhill.
Exactly. And the photograph, actual size. So I just said, look, I love biographies, and I'm surrounded by biographies, and I love them, but I have never ever wanted to write my biography. And I feel so lucky, so blessed that I've been really lucky. I've had a very fortunate career. Came from just a nice family. We lived up the close in Scotland, then moved to the Americana of Knightswood. So it's a good story. There's no big battle with things or whatever. But I said, look, thank you. I really appreciate it. But I said, look, I've got an idea that how about if we wrote together? And she said, well, I'd written with a few people doing different scripts out here and punching up scripts, as they say. And I said, but maybe we could come up with stuff together. I said, I've got an idea. And she went, oh. So she said, well, we need to, sit down and look at it. She said, I've never written with anyone. So I said, okay, well, I said, what we could do, we could put in some stories from my life that will maybe amp them up a little bit. Some of them will calm them down a bit, but we can put them in and mix it all up. So she said, great. We sat down. I think we sat down for about 2 hours. And at the end of 2 hours, we had the first book all framed out. And we were so lucky. And she's just brilliant. And we would just write back and forth. And it was an incredible partnership. And as you said, we've been lucky. We've written 3 books: The Rise, The Catch, The Fall. And it's a lot of it is based on initially 80s Glasgow with 3 young people who then come out here to Hollywood and make it big in different ways. And there's a dark secret and all the things that go with that. And then we've got another 2 books still to write as well. So it's been great. But I couldn't do it without Shari. She's just, the best.
Has anyone, because again, going back to the access you have to the celebrity culture, has anyone read The Rise, The Catch, and The Fall and said to you, is that me, Ross, you're talking about?
Yes.
Really?
They have. Yes, they have. And then sometimes they've said, no, it's not me. And
this is not Alex Stewart, was it?
No. Oh, yeah, no. But they all get mentions. It's funny. They all get mentions in different ways. I put them in. That's the most wonderful thing about doing a book. Like, there's a country singer called Lainey Anders, and my sister is Elaine Anderson. So she's Lainey Anders. So she's in the book. And my nephew, my niece, and Jim, and Paul Cooney is in there. So they're all in there in different places. But the actual characters, like Jerry Butler always goes, I am not Xander Leith, because a lot of people think that the characters, I am not Xander Leith. But people do recognize things. The best person, though, was Jackie Collins, who was so supportive when I was writing. Very quickly, I'll tell you, so when I came to LA, Jackie was so lovely. I was working on American TV on a station here, KTLA, and she wrote to me and just said, welcome to LA, pop round for a cup of tea. And she was so lovely. And then we became really great friends. And then one time she said to me, I've got to go and do this interview, a live interview book session. Will you come and do the interview? And I said, sure. She said, then we'll go and have dinner. And at dinner afterwards, she said, so what else are you doing? I went, I'm writing a book. She went, sorry? I said, I'm writing a book. And she went, and I said, I'm really, and she said, well, what's it like? And I went, well, it's kind of Jackie Collins-ish, but a bit darker. And she said, okay. She said, do you want me to write, the publicity note?
Oh, lovely.
I said, Jackie, that's unbelievable. I said, well, but the caveat is, obviously, if you don't like it, you can, just bin it. And she said, no, I can still write, this is, but still buy it. And then when I wrote it, she was just so lovely. She said, I'll do the note on the one condition that I'm the very first person to read the final draft. Oh. And she did. And we have it on video of Shari and I just standing by our computer waiting for the message from Jackie to tell us what she thought. And again, she was just so lovely about it. So we're really, again, fortunate and that these people gave up their time. And yeah, she was just a great person. And she would say, I know every single person in this book. That's so and so, that's so and so, and I went, yep, yep, yep.
Oh, that's
She
great. She was so
never missed a
accurate.
beat.
That's
Never missed a
brilliant.
beat. She was so brilliant.
Final thing then. I was talking
Yeah.
to John Gordon Sinclair the other day.
Oh, who I was at school with.
No, where are you?
Yes.
He's another
Sinky.
a lovely man. He lives very near me, actually.
Oh, really?
And we didn't know it
I-
until we were talking about. I said to him, I was in this town in Surrey called Ripley. I was getting a coffee, and Paul Weller came out, and I went, that's Paul Weller, and he got into this really old Mini, and I was thinking, he must be a lovely man if he's driving an old Mini. And John Gordon said to me, I says, I live quite near there, and
he was just so that at school. When we started doing like school plays and what have you, he was just brilliant. You just knew that he had that unbelievable talent. I mean, he was always a funny guy. He was a great artist as well. I always remember, you'd look over and he'd be drawing things. It was just brilliant. And then, of course, he's such a talent and a great writer as well now.
Yeah, and yeah,
No, he was.
Yeah, there's
Sinky.
something about him, wasn't there? Just I think something about the film, because I wasn't too sure when I started talking to him about Gregory's Girl, and I was thinking, oh Christ, is he going to think this is over 40 years ago? But it's one of these films that's so ingrained in Scottish culture that you can't not mention it.
Absolutely not. And I mean, I haven't spoken to him for a while. We would always laugh as well because he moved to London way before I did. And then occasionally we'd bump into each other, what have you. And it was so funny because obviously at school, he was just Gordon Sinclair. And then it became like John Gordon Sinclair. And then initially at school, so my full name is Derek Ross King. And then my nickname was Deco. And so it'd be funny, he'd be like, Sinky and Deco. And then it was like, oh, no, we seem to have slightly different names now.
I said to him, what advice would you give to your younger self? And he said, and he thought about it for ages. I thought the connection had fallen away actually at one point. I mean, he thought about it for ages, and then he started telling this brilliant story about as a kid, he was driving along the Clydeside Expressway with his dad, and his dad turned to him and said, he says, Gordon, don't ever regret anything. And I think that probably speaks to more of what was going on in his dad's head at the time. And I was going to ask you the same question, but I can't imagine you would ever say don't have regrets, because it doesn't sound like you have regrets at all. It doesn't sound you've lived that kind of life.
No, not at all. Again, I just followed that advice from mum. So if I had to speak to my younger self, it would be just do your best. And also it's kind of almost like embrace the fear, with your charity, when you read, and I think it must be so lovely that there's a place that people can go to, or a place that people can phone and just have some contact there, which is just such a lovely thing. And in no way does this equate to how anyone feels, but I remember the first time that I went to London on my own, and I got the overnight coach. And you got on this coach, which wasn't the most attractive of coaches, and it was a bit smelly and all the rest of it. And you got out at Gloucester Road tube station, and it's weird that even every time I go back to London, I go by Gloucester Road tube station. I just walk past it or whatever, and I just sometimes take a wee selfie or I just take a moment. And I remember getting off the coach, and you got pushed off the coach at like 5 a.m, and the tubes weren't open. And of course, London, it was like, oh my goodness me, it's London. It's a big, scary place. And I remember that feeling of getting off and feeling really alone and vulnerable and terrified a little bit. And I remember that feeling. And I can't even begin to imagine how people who are in a situation without housing feel that way. That, just that feeling of being alone and what do I do? Where do I go? And, and I was so lucky that, I had a couple of phone numbers of people to go to and all the rest of it. But I think that's with the charity, that's such a wonderful thing. It's just that people know that there's a place they can go to. And as we all know, that at the end of the day, all we want in life is love and shelter. If you can have those two things, it's the most magnificent combination. And for so many people, they don't have either. So again, with the charity, I think it's just brilliant.
Well, thank you, Ross. And it's been absolute delight talking to you today. I really, really enjoyed it. And thanks for joining us on the ScotsCare podcast. I hope you'll come back again one day.
I will come back anytime. I'll try and keep my answers shorter next time and not bore everyone.
That's okay. I'll just edit you out. Don't worry.
Thank you. Just edit. Thank you.
Thank you. See you later. Teddy, bye.
Cheers, Marcus. Thank you.
Love what ScotsCare does? Help us spread the word. Share this podcast, tell a friend, or give us a shout out on social media. Like and share our posts. The more people that know us, the more Scots we can support.
Thanks for listening. And remember, if you don't need a service of ScotsCare, you may be interested in supporting the charity by donating or volunteering your time. It's easy to sign up and get involved. To do so, please visit ScotsCare.com. And that chat with Ross wraps up part 1 of series 3 of the podcast. We'll be back on January the 16th with 6 more great guests for you to enjoy. Until then, bye-bye.